reporting is one thing, but like what PackView was doing was above and beyond. I mean, PackView had some really interesting reporting that you could not get on Amazon easily. And it was not like, what we were doing was accessing the data that was available to us via Vendor Central, Seller Central efficiently. But PackView kind of took that to the next level because you were looking at kind of forward facing share of voice, that type of information, which was much harder to get.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Exit, PackView's interview series, where we dive into journeys of founders, agency leaders, and industry experts navigating the road of acquisition. I'm Melissa Burdick, co-founder and president of PackView. And as a founder myself, I've always been inspired by the stories of entrepreneurs who've built something really cool from the ground up. And that's why I'm excited to bring you The Exit, where we explore the challenges, growth moments, and ultimate successes of real PackView customers who walk the path. So today, I'm thrilled to welcome Lynn Graham, founder and former CEO of Beekeeper Marketing, a national sales agency specializing in e-commerce strategies for over 100 specialty CPG brands. And in 2018, Beekeeper was acquired by Advantage Solutions. And today, Lynn is going to share her incredible journey, her work as an advisor at Canvas Capital, and her take on e-commerce as the future. I've known Lynn for years. Really excited to talk to her today. Lynn, tell us a little bit about your founding story. You started Beekeeper back in 2007. I started Amazon in 2005, and e-commerce was hardly even a thing at that time, let alone this agency ecosystem and all that kind of stuff. So what was it about that moment, the landscape, that sparked your idea to even create Beekeeper in the first place?
Thanks, Melissa, so much for having me on here. I bet you if I went and looked at my emails that I was emailing you when you were a buyer before we knew each other more formally. So back in the day. In terms of how I started Beekeeper, it's so funny, when life happens, it was never a plan to start any of this, but it was more about being opportunistic about what I was passionate about and the opportunities that came up. In the first stage of my career, I was a high-tech product manager. I ended up going to business school, and I was always very interested in entrepreneurship as well as health and wellness. So in my business school days, I interned at Cliff Bar in their new products group. I had ideas for natural products. I'm half Japanese, so the product I had an idea for was a Japanese product that I wanted to bring to the US market. I worked on the business plan there with a professor. He was working on a different new venture incubator that was focused on healthy, functional products. So he and I, my second year of business school, ended up raising some money and starting a company to basically get these brands started. And one of the brands was a company called Lightful. It was a smoothie company. And I went out as a co-founder and VP of marketing for Lightful Foods. And this product was kind of viral with the Weight Watchers community. And I remember I was working a booth at Expo West, which is a natural organic foods trade show. And a buyer walked by and they said, "Hey, guess what? Amazon's going to start selling food." And at the time, I knew of Amazon as, you could buy DVDs and CDs, for those of you who remember what those were, and books, right? And so I said, all right, well, if you think that's a good idea, let's give it a go. So we got the smoothie set up on there. It was this shelf-stable smoothie. Because it had viral appeal, like people started talking about it in Weight Watchers meetings, and you couldn't get it everywhere because we were an upstart brand, and they started talking about it and the sales took off. We had a ton of success driving sales. Then the market tanked. It was the financial crisis, and we ended up losing our investors, and Lightful ended up shutting down. And at the time, I was like 8.9 months pregnant with my second son. So it was not an ideal time to be interviewing anywhere. The buyers took me aside and they just were like, "Hey, we have to get so many of these brands up. I don't have time to talk to any of them. And it's a lot of work, and you know how to do it. So, do you mind if I start sending you some brands?" So I said, okay. And at the time I was a young mom. I had one young kid, and I was going through what a lot of young women go through, which is, hey, do I even want to work full time? Can I, should I work part time? What do I want? And at the time, I was just exploring that. So I had my second child, George, and I ended up taking on a couple of businesses. One of them was Miracle Noodle. They were my first client. And I took them on. I had like no minimums, just to see if I could do it. And they took a chance on me at the time. And then word started to spread. I was in the right place at the right time. There weren't a lot of people doing this, especially not for natural organic foods. And I loved it because all of these brands were mission-based in some way. I felt like they were doing right. These are the products I wanted to feed my own kids. So I felt good about working on them. a lot of the, the Expo West, Expo East brands are great for the environment, or they're working with fair trade. So I felt like the work I was doing was making a positive impact on the community. At the same time, I could work part-time as I was getting my feet under me with having, two young kids. I wanted to work full-time, but I wanted the flexibility to also be there for my kids if they were sick or go to the school picnics. And so one of the things I did right away is, I said, this is awesome because I can work from home. And I did it by myself for a while remotely before everyone was remote. That's how it started. It was not that I woke up one day and thought to myself, what I really want in life is to be an e-commerce broker. My job went away and I couldn't interview anywhere else. And I picked up what I could. And then the next thing I knew, I was like, actually, I really love this, at a time when the market itself was so nascent and it was scaling like crazy. So it was really easy to get business. So in many ways, I was just really lucky to be in the right place at the right time and in the right mindset to be able to take advantage of the opportunity.
Something that I've noticed too about one of your secrets to success and others in this space is that you're the practitioner. You are the hands on keyboard. You learn the tools. You are actually doing the work yourself and understanding, and then hiring a team later on to scale. That's really one of the kind of exciting parts about this business is, and how people got their early starts was like actually doing the work themselves and figuring it out.
So critical to be hands to keys with some of this. And even once Beekeeper was as big as it was going to get, and before I sold, we had 40 employees. And of course, I was not managing the hands to keys for most of the clients, but I always kept one that I did most of the work. First of all, you have to know how to do it so that it's so much about a service industry is having the right processes that are the most efficient. And even if you're building technology or working with technology partners like PackView, like you have a perspective on what is the right way to execute. And that's your secret sauce is in that. It's in the strategy and also in efficient processes. So to do that, you kind of have to have a sense of what it's like to do it. So that's number one. And number two is Amazon is constantly changing. And part of being an expert is noticing those changes. And that was some of my special sauce, was for me to be able to look at small changes that Amazon makes and understanding like what are the implications of that at scale, or to hypothesize about that and run tests to try to figure that out. And so to do that, you have to be in it. Like I'll tell you right now, I'm advising a company, and I noticed that, it used to be that if you were on Vendor Central, for example, like Vendor Central would lower the price to win the buy box almost all the time. There are some exceptions. And now we're just seeing it's not, they're pulsing the buy box. We're just checking it and we're noticing changes in behavior and algorithm that Amazon never projects, they never talk about. But if you really know your business and you're watching closely, you'll pick it up. And that sounds like something small, but in terms of your strategy and execution, it's a huge deal. So anyway, that's something I think is really important for any service provider. Yes, you have to learn the right value. You have to extract yourself. You have to be able to delegate and hire and put in processes and trust your team and all those things. But you also have to be close enough to businesses to see what's happening in the future.
I definitely saw that with you. Well, let's talk a little bit about the tech space. Something else that I definitely know about you and was very interesting was that you started building your own technology very early on. And I remember a lot of phone calls trying to convince you to use PackView. No, I've got technology I'm building in-house. And there was a tipping point at which maybe it became more complex and you decided to start looking into technology. So can you talk a little bit about what was the tipping point around that?
For those of you who've been around as long as Melissa and I have, you can remember that, Amazon advertising did not exist when we were there. And then it showed up and it was very basic. There are only certain things you could do. I mean, if you look at like the Instacarts of the world today, or some of the more recently launched retail media networks, they're just, the level of sophistication is similar to what Amazon was many years ago. And so it didn't used to take as much to get it done. So that was part of it. Part of it was just figuring out what the right thing to do was. But for me, this is also another example of just being opportunistic. My husband, Bill, is a data analytics software engineer. He worked at Lyft and at Twitter. Early days, I started thinking, hey, Beekeeper needs a data analytics platform. And so I nudged my husband. I'm like, who do we know, sweetheart, that could potentially build out one for us? We struck a deal. He left Twitter. He ended up taking a job at Lyft. He put it off for 6 months and he built out like a data and analytics infrastructure. It was more around the reporting. And at that time, the media piece was not as complicated as it used to be. The tipping point came in two different ways. And this also kind of dovetails into one of the factors for why I decided to sell. Because when I was running Beekeeper, I was having a ball. We had an amazing team. We had a great reputation in the marketplace. And I thought to myself, as long as this remains the case, like I don't see any reason ever to sell. And then some of my key competitors started getting picked up by large multinational companies. And I just had this moment of, okay, Amazon advertising is getting more complicated. Amazon itself is getting more complicated. It's harder to win. It's more expensive. You need more bodies on the account to make it scale. And I thought, it's great that Bill was nice enough to help build this out. And we had a small team. We had a small team in India. We have this amazing guy, John Ekholm, who led the charge on our tech. He's so good. But competing with the Omnicoms of the world, I suspected that I would not be able to keep up. So that's number one. And number two is because I had a tech background. I used to be a product manager. I did understand that the business model for developing technology, the cost of talent, the type of talent is very, very different than operating a services industry. And I didn't have the appetite or the funds to want to build that out. And I knew I needed to focus on what I did well, which was the strategy piece, combining what I know about brand management and marketing and CPG and Amazon and the execution, the technology used to execute on optimizing media campaigns, for example. I mean, reporting is one thing, but PacView was doing was above and beyond. I mean, PacView had some really interesting reporting that you could not get on Amazon easily. And it was not what we were doing was accessing the data that was available to us via Vendor Central, Seller Central efficiently. But PacView kind of took that to the next level because you were looking at kind of forward-facing share of voice, that type of information, which was much harder to get. That was number one. And then number two was just the technology behind optimization. That alone, I mean, to do a really great job at retail media network execution, you have to have the strategy. Somebody asked me yesterday, I was giving a talk to a bunch of Japanese companies who are thinking about bringing their products into the US. And they asked me, are there any AI retail media options out there? And Melissa, you're probably a better person to ask about that than I am. I don't know much about what those options are. I know people are talking about it a lot, but in my opinion, there's a big part of the media execution, which you require a person who's knowledgeable about the product and the market and Amazon. And then, yes, the execution, I can see AI and technology is so important for that execution. Both of those things need to be there. You can't have one without the other. So for me, I was our expertise is in this part, the strategy, knowing the brand, knowing Amazon well enough to know how to execute the strategy, what's possible. But the execution of how do we run ads against catalogs that could be thousands of products in a surgical way to be able to execute precisely against that strategy? That is not something you can do with manpower or woman power in an efficient way. And so at that point is when I said, okay, A, we need a technology. B, it can't be my husband taking 6 months off of work and then, a small 3-person team. These are solutions that you need professionals that do it full time. It's a totally different model than the sales model. And we're better off letting somebody who's an expert in that do that. And then also just seeing what players out there. It wasn't clear who was going to evolve as the best. And, so we wanted to be able to experiment with that. That's what made us decide to work with PacView. It's also what made me decide to say, hey, okay, I'm on top right now, but if my competitors are being bought up by companies that have deep, deep pockets and that can potentially invest in this, maybe I'm at a point where in 5 years, I'm going to be in trouble unless I have those resources. So that's part of what I started thinking about. It kind of led me to consider selling.
Yeah, that's a great reason. So let's talk about that. You decided to partner with Advantage. Did you hire a banker? Did you hire consultants? That's one of the questions I get a lot with agencies as they start considering this path as kind of the support that they needed to get to that. And then how did you decide on Advantage through that process?
Advantage was one of the first companies that approached me about selling. And I went through a process with them where, I didn't know. And at the time, I was just curious to know what was my company worth. At the time, we were less than 10 people. They made an offer. It wasn't worth it. And like I said, I felt like I still had a lot of runway to go and I was having fun. And I was nervous about giving up control. And we had something so special with the beekeeper culture. I played sports in college and I'm a huge team player. And like so much of what I was getting out of beekeeper was just like being on a high performing team. It felt so good. So I just really did not want to risk that. I was nervous about that. So anyway, so I said no to them. And at the time I was nervous because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm saying no. And it's funny that Dave Cortese, who was there at the time, said, he kind of looked at me and was like, it's okay. It's okay to say no. Let's just keep in touch. It's not, I felt like I was closing a door, but that was one thing that I learned, that like saying no now doesn't mean no forever. And people who are working in acquisitions are used to being told no. And in some ways, if you're able to say no, like, I think that's, you know what you want. Like, I think all of that is so important going in. And I think that people respect that. So that was kind of one learning I had. So anyway, we kept in touch, and over the next couple of years, I'd say I was approached by maybe 4 or 5 other companies. And I always said, I'm not looking to sell, but I always kept their information just in case. And what Advantage did really well is they just kept in touch. Advantage had purchased another company, an agency called Sage Tree. So one of the concerns I had was, Beekeeper was remote from day one. It was core to the culture because, like I said, the person that worked at Beekeeper was somebody who, yes, was super smart and hard driving and wanted to be in the space and like loved it, but also wanted balance in their life. And the fact that we were a remote company, we really protected that culture. And one big concern I had was, well, if I get acquired by one of these companies, are they going to make us go into an office? Because if they did, I'd lose my entire team. I'd lose the culture. In retrospect, having gone through COVID, it's not an easy transition, and not every company is set up for it, and not every person is set up to be able to work remotely or not. And so to me, that was a big concern on that. Anyway, so I kept in touch with them, and they acquired this company called Sage Tree. Sage Tree was also 100% remote. They were about the same size when they acquired Beekeeper. And the CEO or the 2 founders of Sage Tree just occasionally would call me whenever they were in town, and we'd grab a coffee. When I go to a trade show, they would pop in and just come see me. And a big concern is like, how is the team, right? It's not just about me, but like, is the team happy? And they were like, yes, we're happy. Things are going well. So it was kind of like a very slow sell on their part, but I really appreciated that. I got to know some of the people. And then the founders of Sage Tree, they made it through their earnout, and then they decided to stay when they didn't need to. And so I just kind of watched that. It was like over a period of time, that said a lot to me. The other piece is like when I went through the first process with Advantage and they gave me an offer, it gave me a data point. It said, okay, here's my EBITDA, and like, here's what they offered me. Here's the multiple. And there is a certain point where you're like, okay, if I'm saying no to that, you have something to lose at that point, and you think about what it means for your family and for your team and all of that. And so at least I could say in my head, okay, at this point, it would be really hard to say no, because if anything happened, now I've got something to lose. So that also was kind of in the back of my head. I started watching kind of what was happening in the marketplace, and my business was growing. I kind of reached that number in my head, like whatever that multiple was. So I said, okay, I could either keep going, or like maybe now is the time to just at least explore it. And one of the companies that I worked with early on, they're a company called Propeller. And they are like an agency. They outsource like ARAP, payroll, etc. So they're kind of like what Beekeeper was, but for your back office. So a lot of my clients, small consumer packaged goods companies, like you probably need a full-time accountant, but you need like part-time of a controller and really part-time of a fractional CFO. So they provide all of that at this agency. But they also had an M&A advisory practice. And there was a guy, Jeff Gustafson, who is a founder of Propeller. He was so awesome. Anyway, so I hired Propeller to help navigate it. And I said, hey, you guys know our books. You've got our financials. They've worked with many CPGs who sold to larger companies. He himself used to be an investment banker. So I was able to hire him as part of Propeller's services. There was an hourly rate, so it wasn't a percentage of the sale, which happens with, if you hire a banker. And I remember him sitting me down and saying, okay, here are the options. You can hire a banker, and it's going to take 8 months, and they're going to charge you a percent of the sale, and they're going to send this book out to hundreds of companies. You're going to go on the road. You're going to talk to all these folks. Mm-hmm. That's one option. And meanwhile, like I've got a full-time job and 2 kids, right? So to me, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so overwhelming. And Plus the company doesn't know what's happening. It's a huge distraction. And he's like, or you've got these 5 companies that have already approached you. And by the way, like if you go through this whole process, they're going to come down with 5 companies anyway. And like, they're probably going to be some of those companies. And those companies don't want to know that you're factoring in this percentage and they don't want to pay that, right? So the other thing you could do is just run a process, like just approach these 5 companies, but do it in a really organized way so that there's a deadline. Like really what you need is 2 companies to come to the table so that it's a competitive situation. To do that, he's like, I can help you put together a deck. We'll send it out to those 5 people. We'll let them know there's a deadline. We'll let them know, we'll ask them if they're interested. And as long as you get 2, now you're going to have a competitive situation. And in fact, I did get 2 and we were able to do really well with that. And it meant that instead of it taking 8 months to a year of plus working full time, and it really, even that process, which was like a small abridged process, took its toll. I mean, it was still, I was flying out to meet these guys. It was stressful. It was hard to choose. Advantage didn't give me the best offer in terms of money, but I thought that my team would do the best there in terms of the culture and the fact that they had acquired a very similar company that was 100% remote and the team stayed there. To me, that was the main reason. Like I wanted all of that. So that's why I ended up deciding to go with Advantage. But I cannot say enough about Jeff and Propeller helping me through that process, because it was not just about showing me my options, confirming what like I thought my market value was, helping me negotiate. I mean, he showed up at every negotiation with me because it's a lonely situation. I mean, Melissa, I know you had a partner, so it was a little different, but going through it for the first time for something that is so important, it really just helped having him there. Things would happen, right? He'd be calling me. He was just the best. I said to him once, I was like, do you have sisters or something? Like, you're really good. He was really great. He's just awesome. So I was really lucky to have him as a partner to help navigate the situation.
That's amazing. All right. So let's go to a little bit of post-acquisition of what you're doing now. So it sounds like you're advising, you have a lot of cool things. What are you up to now? And talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges that you've seen since then.
One, I think, big challenge that I went through is just when you sell, you are like giving up your company. So like there is a bit of like an identity crisis that comes with that. And, I decided to leave Advantage. I didn't want to jump into anything new. I mean, my biggest priority right now is I've got a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, and the whole beekeeper, growing that business. It was such an amazing ride and it was so fun and it was a ton of work, as you know. So these years that I have left with my kids, like I want to be there. So I want to be at every volleyball and baseball game. And so that's a priority. But at the same time, I want to keep my toe in things. So in many ways, like the beekeeper situation was perfect because it scratched so many itches of, I get to work on strategic problems. I get to be on a high performing team with people that I love being around. It was fun. I was get to like work on companies that are doing something good for the world. So that was scratching like my philanthropic itch. So after I left Beekeeper, I was thinking, okay, well, what are my priorities now? And I'm kind of trying to Frankenstein the best parts of all of it, but also get that, like, also have enough time to work out and also have enough time to like do whatever I want with my kids. So those things like just self-care and spending family time, I need more of that pie piece that I had when I was at Beekeepers. But I don't want to give up the other pieces. So I'm doing it. I'm trying to fill all the pie pieces, but in a different way. So I've got my tennis game is getting better. My kids, of course, like I've got that nice pie piece and I'm preserving that. I'm also working for Kainos Capital, which is a private equity firm, and helping their portfolio companies with their e-commerce strategy and execution in an advisory capacity. And that is awesome because I've never worked in private equity before. I'm able to learn something new, but I also am able to bring my experience to bear in really meaningful ways for the companies that they work with. There's a lot of thought. Smart people have thought about why they're buying these companies. They're well-run companies that are scaling with resources to be able to build. So it's fun to work on that. I love the CEOs that I'm working with. So that's great. The products themselves are not as mission friendly as what I did at Beekeeper, right? They're not like fair trade, coconut oils, that type of thing. To be able to capture that philanthropic part, I'm donating some of my advisory services by being a board member at Naturally Bay Area, working on pitch slams, so getting to work with entrepreneurs in that way. There's also an OSC venture fund that raises money and helps get mission-based companies off the ground. So I'm working with them on a pro bono basis to try to instead of going to the food bank, like this is my skill. So I want to use it. Like, feel like this is a way I can add the most value in the world. So I'm making sure to donate my time in those areas. Plus, I just love getting samples of weird things. Like yesterday, I got to try like a bar made out of Japanese sweet potatoes, like stuff like that. I love. It's just fun for a cocktail conversation, and for my kids love that. So I'm doing that. And yeah, and like learning about investing is really fun too. So I'm joining the council, which is a consortium of women operators who invested in the fund, but they also have angel opportunities that they may pass on just because they don't fit the fund's thesis. But I get to look at those and discuss those with other women operators. So it's not just people who can write a check, but people who actually run businesses and do it in kind of a collaborative, kind of female-led way, which I'm really excited about. So those are all the things that I'm focusing on. I'm about to launch a website called Hustle and Flower. So it's really just, for me, it's my own kind of personal thesis of what I want this next chapter to be like post Beekeeper, capturing not just work, but passion projects that I'm working on. And I also, like, some of my old clients have asked me to come help them and be on their advisory boards or their board of directors. So I'm doing that too. So I'm kind of Frankensteining all these pieces together to try to get what I've always been trying to get, which is the perfect balance. And of course, no one ever finds it, but that's what I'm striving for.
That's really funny because I remember when I was talking to you post Beekeeper or an Advantage, and I was like, are you bored? And so now you just listed about, 20 things that you're doing versus.
I know, I was so worried about being bored, but then I thought to myself, like, what was I thinking? I know myself. I'm not like a person that's going to sit around. So yeah, boredom is not an issue.
You've really done a lot of things. So last question, as you look at e-commerce in 2025, I mean, you've been in this industry as long as that, over 20 years. How do you see, the future? Is it harder than ever to be a brand? You're consulting, private equity as these brands are trying to build themselves. It's definitely not 2007 when it was just wild, wild west and like brands were kind of coming out of everywhere and being able to build themselves quickly. What are you seeing in 2025 as, advising your brands on how they can be successful?
So a couple things. One is that because I've been in CPG for so long, it's definitely harder. There's no question about it. You've got deep-pocketed CPG companies coming in, and we all know that buying search advertising is more important than ever. And if you're Nestle, you can afford to pay more than if you're a smaller company. So it used to be that Amazon was, what I loved about it when it first started was it was like such a democratic platform. You could get up and running no matter if you were a 2-person company or if you were huge. And if you had something that was really great, you could access consumers and put your products in front of them. And if it was a good product, it would sell. Now that's much harder to do because you're competing for those ad spots with some of the largest companies in the world. So especially in CPG. So to me, like, I feel like an interesting solve is and something that I'm working on right now is how do you drive discovery of new brands? That's always been a challenge for at least for the last couple of years. But I think what's really interesting is a potential unlock could be around some of the other platforms that have emerged, like TikTok. The fact that they're integrating with Amazon, that I think could be a potentially interesting model that I'm testing right now. So driving discovery for brands in mature categories on Amazon is something that I'm looking at closely. Maybe we can talk in a few months and I'll have something interesting to say about some tests I'm running there. But I also, now that I'm also doing the private equity firm I'm working for is not just CPG, it's outside. I'm seeing that there are other industries that are not as sophisticated or they haven't figured. You think about COVID, right? When COVID happened, everyone started buying products online. And even before that, like food products realized how important e-commerce was. But if they didn't before COVID, they really figured it out then. But there are other industries where they've been slower to figure it out. So it is interesting to see, wow, there are pockets where even the basics have not yet been done, which is kind of fun. It's fun to go in because you can make such a huge difference when just the foundation, it hasn't even been thought of. So anyway, I would just say, like, there's some pockets, some hardlines pockets. Sometimes it's like auto parts. There are all kinds of industries where they have been slower to adopt. And there is still some of that kind of early day feeling in terms of opportunity. So that's been fun.
Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing interview. I just want to sum up some of the points that I've learned. One of the many But just if I were to kind of take the key takeaways that I took from this conversation, one is early days of creating your own company. A couple of things that I really wanted to hammer home that I hear from you. One is having the passion. Like, you created an agency based on the products you love within the consumable space that are, natural, organic, fair trade, things that you love yourself. That it is always like, it's easier to create a company where you have the passion about something than not. So that was one. And then the other one that I think is super critical, and I've seen as a success metric for agencies, is you are hands-on key. And you even said, even when you got to having a team and scaling the business, you still kept an account so that you were close to the business and understanding. And I think that's even helped you do consulting today, because you really understand a pulse of what's happening by being kind of close to the products and how to grow them. And then when you talk about kind of building your company and the things that you need, and you said this to me early days too, when I was building PackView and I was calling you and I was like, help. The Propeller, the company that you talked about today, you talked about them to me back then, was having back office help, of being able to find that trusted partner that helped you to do that. That was critical. And then during the acquisition process of creating competition, of having, a couple of, we went through a banking process. We did the whole 8-month thing that you talked about. And you're right. It was like its own job. It is its own job. So it's a very challenging, time-consuming process. So you went a route of like, you already had interest and you start out with a lot, you get down to a few, and then even having 2 is critical to create that competitive aspect. So you were very smart, had good advice on that one. And then something else I really like the way that you talk about your life is this pie concept of being able to fill that pie of like kids, philanthropy, advisory work, tennis, like your own personal things. So it's kind of like having this pie concept that can be today when people are working, that can be post acquisition. And when you start doing your own thing, like you'll not be bored as long as you kind of think of this concept as a pie and how you're filling those pie pieces.
And your job doesn't have to check off all of them. You can find other ways, like the tennis solves the team part, like the in-person team part. So that I used to get from work. So there are things that you can get from different places, like figuring that out, like freeing myself that a job has to be all the things that Beekeeper was to me, for me the unlock that has really helped in just even in the last 6 months. So
yeah, hopefully we'll see some of that content on your new website, Hustle and Flower, which sounds like a nod to the Beekeeper and but kind of this next phase. So we'll be looking out for your website and we'll search that up and put that information into the interview series. And then lastly, as we talk about 2025 and I say it's harder than ever to be a seller, but some of the things that you've said is really interesting. 2 things. One is new platforms for discovery. So as Amazon becomes more competitive, as the bigger brands come in with their big budgets, of looking at other platforms like TikTok to help with increase of awareness. And then the second is looking for kind of other industries that are less mature, less sophisticated. CPG has become much more mature. COVID kind of forced them to figure out e-commerce. But there are other pockets of opportunity where there's categories that are less mature, still have basics to fix, that you're going after to pursue. So that sounds like when I called you up after Beekeeper and I said, are you bored? And then you listed about 20 new things. I understood that you're definitely not bored. And for those of you who are interested in this acquisition process and exit, we all can be safe to understand that the type A kind of people that Lynn is will always have things to do. One of the things I love about this industry, whether you're a customer, whether you're a competitor, we all actually talk to each other all the time. And it's a really fun industry to be in. I think something we all share is that passion, which has fueled kind of our success. Thank you for your time and thanks for what you're doing. Sounds like really exciting things.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's just really fun to talk to you.